Hi, everyone. Welcome to Fresh from the Studio. We are excited to have Breck Baig, Sara Drescher, and Nell Langford present for us today. Each artist will give a presentation of about 10 minutes. Feel free to put your questions and comments in the chat. At the end of the third presentation, we'll come back together and answer any questions, comments that you have, and then talk about any upcoming events that are at Women in Their Work or elsewhere. Um, we'll start today with Sara Drescher.
Thank you so much. For those of you who are unfamiliar with me and my work, I'm a professional artist working out of Fredericksburg, Texas. I have my Master of Fine Arts degree in studio art from Texas Tech University School of Art and my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from the University of North Texas School of Art. I enjoy the possibilities surrounding still life paintings. There's an opportunity to use symbolism and bring to my audience's attention the overlooked in our lives. Very often, still life compositions involve things from domestic settings, and these objects are often overlooked and discarded. And I find most of the subjects that I paint secondhand. I paint watercolor still lifes to talk about issues that women face. Currently, I'm focusing on two specific series of still life paintings. Domestic object and plaything series are painted on a white field as a nod to commercial merchandise photography and the commodification of women's bodies. The Plaything series talks about girls' experiences because I think that's an important part of the conversation surrounding women's experiences in the workplace and in homes. I purposely use nostalgia in my work to emphasize how far we've come in our society regarding the rights of women and also how little has changed regarding the rights of women. I reference the mid-century and that ideology surrounding gender roles and expectations because I feel like those expectations are still hanging around. My grandmother was a preacher's wife in the 1950s, and she wanted to be an artist. She never got the chance to pursue that dream, and I think about her a lot when I work on this series. I feel like there are many people who know women who lived through and were directly affected by this point in American history. It wasn't all that long ago that women couldn't get a credit card without a husband or a guardian. The oppressive and outdated ideology surrounding women's roles is limiting and can be harmful if a woman does not conform to these standards. Currently, there are important conversations about domestic labor and especially surrounding women in heterosexual relationships. For me, I think it's something we still need to talk about and highlight because women are still seen as commodities. We're often viewed as a source of free domestic labor instead of as individuals who have more to give to our society than birthing a child. I use this dishware like tiny billboards. These dishes have been exclusively marketed to women and are present in women's spaces, which make them ideal for me to use in my visual language. I've been working on this dishware series for about 3 years now, and it's growing and evolving. I present the dishware with altered imagery, phrases, or wrapped. The phrases reflect my own lived experiences, the shared experiences of others, or current events. This painting references how women today are still bound by outdated societal expectations, passive aggressive diminishing, and violence. Nature and physics demonstrate that if a container is put under pressure for too long, an explosion is sure to follow. I like to use humor in my work. I find it's a way to start conversations and connect with people. This phrase has resonated with a lot of women. For myself, I grew up in a very conservative Christian denomination, and a lot of these pieces are part of my lived experience. The more I move around in the world and I understand things beyond what I was indoctrinated with, I observe that women, especially women of color, are still affected by direct or implied oppressive societal expectations. While I do use humor, I also make pieces that talk about implied violence against women. This piece was inspired by my niece's experiences in the restaurant industry in Las Vegas. I heard the phrase, she's asking for it, all growing up, and I didn't really think much about it until I became an adult woman and understood what this phrase implies. I've heard the phrase, she's asking for it, out of the mouths of men and women. We're never asking for violence. Something I frequently ponder is double standards surrounding women. It seems to show up mostly in workplaces, but it also shows up for women just existing in the world. I'm perplexed by what is considered appropriate for a man is inappropriate for a woman. And I just want to keep asking the question, why? This piece was inspired by my friends' stories about infertility that resulted in painful conversations with people in their lives. Currently, a person's decision to be child-free by choice can also become a volatile conversation in our society. In the Plaything series, I use nostalgia and humor again. These toys can also be tiny billboards to start more conversations. And by the way, this mathematical formula is from my friend's doctoral thesis and is used with permission. What children hear and absorb from their environments impacts the future of society. In this series, I consider how I, as a child, heard women spoken about in media and from other adults. This framing of women affected how I viewed myself and evolved as a person. Thus, many of the phrases and imagery from the dishware series have traveled into the toy series. Children often use play to practice social cues and learn how they fit in society. These toys can represent characteristics for the next generation of women to emulate and reclaim. Controlling what is appropriate for women to talk about is harmful. Think of what it means when we tell children what they can and can't talk about. It affects their development of personhood, and it becomes a safety issue. One of my favorite images to reclaim in both series is the female reproductive organs. I'm referencing the conversation around the autonomy of a woman's body, but it's especially poignant to see this image on a child's toy. Societal conditioning starts early, but young girls are often forced into adult conversations and situations. Generational trauma can result from oppressive societal expectations, and combining the two in this way, I'm beginning to explore those ideas. Basically, what's spoken about the girl can shape the woman. All right, and this is an image of my studio. I'm really lucky I get to work from home, and I made the primary bedroom in my home my studio. So it's like the biggest room in the house. And I have these great windows that I have set up workstations at. I like to use natural light. So I'm not a night owl. I am a morning person, and I get up and work with the natural light as much as I can. And I like to just fill my studio with things that make me happy and just make it really comfortable. And I just loved going to work every day. I'm going to show some works in progress kind of things too. I like to make mock-ups using Photoshop and photographs that I take of the still lifes that I set up and play with ideas. So I'm interested in sort of creating these like stacked conversations, which is sort of a double entendre as well. Unpaid domestic labor is something that I'm really interested in. I grew up with a stay-at-home mom, so it's something I didn't really think about much as a kid. But now it's really part of the conversation among women right now. And women are often called gold diggers if they need financial assistance, but they're also expected to cook and clean and pay the bills. It's just a weird conversation. Here's a painting in progress. I don't usually show them at this stage because they look bad, but double standards also often show up in childhood. And so this bossy little girl is cooking to become an intimidating woman. And I resonate a lot with the word bossy. I'm the eldest daughter, so I heard it a lot. And I'm curious as to why like leadership skills that are appearing in women and girls are dismissed as bossy. I don't know. I just think that's an interesting thought. I prefer boss, but whatever. I'd also like to explore more about the effect of consumerism and gender roles surrounding women and girls. So here I'm sort of playing with the idea of like a parody of a toy ad and like wording and things like that. Like it's just a kind of a start of an idea. Here's another piece about double standards involving toys, and I've sort of reversed the roles on each set. And it's kind of interesting to see how the wording affects how the piece kind of resonates. And this last one is from my experience growing up in the church. There are a lot of ideas surrounding my own identity as a human being that I'm still unlearning from my own childhood experiences. Thank you so much for your time. This is how you can contact me. I would love to connect and collaborate. So if you're interested in seeing more of my work, here's my website. You can email me and just keep an eye on what I'm doing on social media.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Next up will be Breck.
All right. So while I'm pulling my slides up, I just want to share how touched I am by Sara's work because I'm a stay-at-home mom predominantly. I'm also an artist, but my real job. I have 3 small children, 2 are daughters, and it just resonates so much. That's why I love having these like conversations. Very timely. All right, let me share my screen. So I think it's really interesting to have these artist conversations because as much as like Sara resonates, I actually feel like I'm very much the opposite side of the coin in a lot of ways. Where there's a lot of, she's very thoughtful and calculated and has an MFA. I will jump into mine, which is a very different experience. I am a self-taught artist. I've painted my entire life, and a lot of my work stems from, again, being in motherhood and then kind of reacting to these past memories and recollecting my childhood and with the questioning of, is that the way it seemed? And how that kind of can play with your mind a little bit. So kind of going chronologically, a lot of my work is an abstracted landscape. I grew up in the mountains in Colorado, and in there, I was just surrounded by nature. My backyard was a forest. And so for me, nature and my childhood were just interrelated. And so coming back and kind of looking through this adult lens, it's almost like putting a kaleidoscope or goggles on and realizing you can't go back. So these are sort of invented memory of landscapes. So this Red Canyon, it is a piece. I grew up in central Colorado, so we had lots of red canyons, and I remember doing this drive, and this kind of fantastical nature is something I really like enjoy painting. A lot of my process has to do with intuition and not really having a plan. So when I paint, I tend to be intuitive. So the first thing that's important to me is color. Sorry, let me close my windows. And so after color, I tend to come up with like a palette, a feeling, and things that I want to convey that way. Pause just for a second. All right. And so this is the same canyon that I grew up in and seeing all the time, and this is just a different interpretation. So for me, like I said, color, palette, memory, and where, like Sara is very much like creating a still life of something that is realistic. For me, when I paint, the most important thing is freedom. It's all about freedom of, constraints, freedom of reality. I actually don't want things to be terribly representational. I really like when they are fantastical and sort of ecstatic and make the viewer kind of question perspective. So in this case, it's, are we looking at it from the top down? Are we looking at it from the side? Is this abstraction? Is this reality? I like kind of playing with all of those like borders and edges. This one's a little bit more based in reality, being in Texas, right? This highway flowers and these blue bonnets, but also having, again, this theme of a warped perspective, fantastical nature. for me, a lot of painting is very meditative. And I am sort of a night owl. So I have a studio in the back of my house where, you know, putting the kids away, I can sneak back there late at night and again, go back to this total freedom of inventing feelings, snippets of my day, things I saw, and how do you kind of piecemeal them together in a way that, you know, is sort of evocative of emotion more than it is of reality. This piece of coronary sort of being a double entendre, being like those funeral flowers, but that this is not, it is not a somber piece, right? It is a very joyful piece, and just kind of that a meditation on that sense that the end of life isn't always a sad thing. Sometimes it can be very elevating, very joyous, and it is just you're sprouting again. And again, these themes of perspective. Am I an ant? Am I a giant? Is this a small garden, a large garden? Where are we in the world? And then see moving along, right? This like braided sweetgrass on the left-hand side, these swirls of a storm, possibly petals, possibly flowers. I just like to play with people's minds, and a nicer way to say, I don't know a nicer way to say that, but play with people's minds a little bit in their perspective. These fighting trees, again, coming from a place of intuition, actually, when I start to paint, because I don't really have a plan, I have a palette first, my painting process tends to be like a puzzle. So it's almost like I am figuring it out as I am going, and it's like the appeal for painting for me is meditative, but it's also, I think, more a mental exercise of how can I paint myself out of this idea? How can I convey something that is very squishy and nebulous? And it is again, it's a mental exercise. It's a mental puzzle where the goal is kind of for me to be able to be satisfied less. And the secondary order is like really the aesthetic value of it. And so in this case, sometimes through these puzzles and you're kind of painting yourself in and out of a situation in a painting, right? And reacting. One of the things that there's these fun things that pop up and you'll find a little moment that you liked and then kind of dig into that. And so in this painting specifically, one moment that I ended up really enjoying was these scurvy and kind of menacing trees, which actually ended up reminding me very much of in The Wizard of Oz, which was like my family's Thanksgiving watch. So it was those fighting trees in The Wizard of Oz, the ones that are throwing the apples and terrifying the Tin Man. So this one is the fighting trees. And then further kind of digging into this abstraction of just, again, this feeling. And so to me, you know, going to Florida feels like this. So this is a sense of place, but it is without context, you would have no idea it's actually a place. So kind of the nod to the Florida is calling it the Lily Pulitzer acid trip. Because to me, yeah, that's Florida. It's just ecstatic, it's loud, I can't wrap my mind around it. I'm not a Florida person, no offense to Florida. But just really enjoying, for me and my process is now, I think I am becoming more comfortable leaning into abstraction. I always appreciate like the Abex movement, but for me, it's been really hard to have that kind of bravery to move away from representation entirely. And so this piece, again, is another piece that comes from my memory. But what I thought was interesting is in my studio, I had these two pieces side by side, and I realized how well they played together. And so I think it just like comes back to this like kaleidoscopic vision of places we've been in the past. Even though they're so unrelated, right? One is Colorado, one is Florida, one is pure abstraction, and one is somewhere in the middle. You can see all the very messy work all behind it of my studio. I wish I included a really good shot. So this is Water Rooster. This really is, you know, one of those paintings, I think, for the other artists on the call, you know, there's those paintings that evolve and you end up somewhere entirely different from where you started. I wish I had process shots, but this is 17 paintings in one painting. And I ended up finally being really happy with where we landed. Again, this perspective shifting, right? Is this on the top left-hand corner, are we looking down at a creek? Is it a waterfall? Is this grass? For me, it's just finding these little moments of joy in these paintings. Again, it's really for myself because it's so important to me and my having a creative outlet. This is the Better on Fire in California than Alive in Arizona, which is like a little nod to some Arrested Development. And also just like this thought, right? Like these are these night paintings that are sort of intrusive thoughts and this feeling of, constant wildfires and fear and like climate change and just, I don't know how to express that anxiety with words, but I can try my best to express it. And I hope that like this painting did a somewhat decent job where you're like, something's unsettling. It is almost calm, but on the precipice of unraveling. And then very much a move away from, nighttime anxieties into like a daytime work, which is again, this like sense of like cocooning and calmness, but it's also still, you know, a perspective challenge. And I think these works have really been more influenced by, I started in ceramics. And so moving away from ceramics and still trying to get something that feels 3D, kind of like a nod to Henry Moore, which is like these names Moore. I just like love his way of form. And so just quickly to wrap it up, doubling down on these. These are the newer works. These are like a little bit softer, a little bit more undulating. Again, trusting myself enough to go into abstraction a little bit more, and playing with materiality. And then this is just to give context of these 3D forms that are actually really informing my paintings, and how they're not quite the same, but there's some referential pieces in there. So that is where I will stop.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
And next up is Nell.
All right, let me share my screen. All right, well, thank you so much for having me. And wow, what a great, I'm in really great company with these ladies. My goodness, their work is so different and so beautiful. And I really appreciate just being in the same room with you all. So my name is Nell Langford, and I live in Dallas, Texas. I have roots based in Belgium, which is a strong influence in my work. I went to school in Texas at University of North Texas many, many years ago. My mother and grandfather were very big influences in my work from a very young age, as they were also artists as well, painters and sculptors, and so I couldn't get away from art if I tried, because we were constantly in museums and going to shows and things like that. So based here in Dallas, Texas, but background in Europe. And my work is largely based on figurative work, and specifically the female condition, identity. I've started working on several different veins of work, kind of studying the human impact on nature and our bodies and our culture as a result of industrial process. My process that I work in is very intuitive. In my life, I like to have things very controlled and scheduled, as we all have if you have children, and the daily life is very regimented. So in my artistic life, I really try to let go, experiment with materials, and try not to get too tight. So this first little series of work is based on the idea of these kind of ancient reliquaries. If you've ever, done any background in, history, they talk about these little intimate objects that people would give or keep in their pocket. And so to me, they're designed as little receptacles or tiny bundles of sacred items, kind of with a nod back to this historical basis. The tiny wooden paintings in these modern reliquaries exist alone instead of an actual object. And it's my response to this temporary quality of visual keepsakes in our very frenetic world of Snapchat and Instagram and all of these different things where we're constantly having these images. At the same time, no one is printing photographs anymore. And so this is kind of a way to have a modern nod to this old style of keeping, visual reference. And they're really, they're meant to be kept in a pocket or a hidden cabinet only to be viewed for the intended owner. It could be a portrait of an eye or a navel or a small body part. Really just for, something intimate to look at. So these are just examples of the different pieces, and they're 4 by 3 inches. They're very, very small. So and then I have some larger works. So my larger works are traditionally, oil on canvas or acrylic on canvas. And again, addressing the female condition, female issue. And other one. Like many women of my age, I also went through many fertility issues. And so part of that is, something I addressed in my work, this idea of our bodies and nature, our expectations, the difficulties that we have, whether we want to be a mother or trying to be a mother, the struggle that can present. So a lot of my work also deals with this idea or this feeling of invisibility. So oftentimes, you won't actually see the specific face or facial figure, because to me, that's not as important. It's really just, addressing how sometimes we feel invisible, especially, women as we age. There's this feeling that you are irrelevant, and working in the fashion industry for many, many years, where, ageism and, these very specific ideas about beauty and relevance are all kind of intertwined. So a lot of my work deals with just trying to, try to address that and bring it to the forefront. A lot of my process is very intuitive. I let the paint do what it wants to do a lot of times. So if that means it's dripping or it's layers, there's usually multiple layers in my work before I get to the finished product. And then later on, I started actually making works that were absent of the female form. So this would be, typically you would see the female form on the bed or in this environment. And now I'm taking that out of the image. And so what does the environment look like with the absence of the human body in it? And so this also, again, is just another part where I'm starting to use distortion and abstraction in the body, but also incorporating aspects of nature in that as well. So in these later works, also just trying to incorporate more of this distortion, where everything is not so realistic, and that, again, this feeling of being invisible. Where's our station in life? Where do we fit in? And these are acrylic on canvas. So again, more layers, maybe starting with the figure, leaning towards abstraction, And then these are current works that I have in my studio right now that I've been working on a larger series. And again, just starting with kind of a basic drawing and then adding these different layers, but trying to keep things very loose and, you know, not getting too tight in the works or the compositions. And then here's some works on paper. These I like to incorporate some elements of, you know, comic relief too, like Sarah's pieces where she's just being very frank about, you know, our daily lives. The one on the right is, you know, it's called Your Menstrual Mystery Solved, watercolor and ink. And I actually just burned a hole in the paper to show that. And then, you know, I like to experiment a lot with different materials. So this is another series where I am using these large burlap bags that are used in the coffee making industry and just experimenting with different fabrics and creating images on them that reflect some part of that industry where, you know, women are involved, families are involved. How does this affect, you know, their lives, you know, by these industries and how it affects nature. And so my task right now is that I have about 20 of these different bags that I'm working on doing different images of women that would be, you know, working in this type of industry. And then lastly, I've been working on another series having to do with, you know, humanity's impact on nature. So I had been studying, you know, these different images of places that have been really affected by, you know, man, like Chernobyl, and what would those places look like once man has left. And so I imagined this world where there are these very where nature prevails, but it's still a very bizarre and weird, you know, new organisms. So these are some of the paintings surrounding that. So Pripyat Meadow. So Pripyat is the town that's just outside of Chernobyl, where it was really affected by, you know, everything that happened. And so I was imagining, you know, what nature would look like, you know, kind of post-apocalyptic. You know, it's still surviving, but there are these weird plants and nature and animals and things. And then I think that's a small picture of my studio. I think I took the other video out, but here's where you can reach me. And I hope to see you all on the social media. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for those wonderful presentations. It was really cool to have sort of a trio of painters who are all sort of working in topics that are in relation to each other. So I think now would be a good time to open up the Zoom for questions. Feel free to put a question in the chat and I can read it out, or also can ask your own question too. But thank you again to our three artists. Well, I do have a question that could maybe be an icebreaker, actually. This one is for Sarah, and I thought it was interesting that you were calling the objects that you were painting billboards, especially since there's such domestic objects and billboards are so public and the scale is totally different. So I was hoping you could speak more to sort of your use of that.
Yeah. I'm using billboards as more of a communicative sort of genre. not in a sort of like literal sense, but in a way that we communicate, advertise. It's a connection a little bit to consumerism too, but it's that usually these objects don't really communicate about their owners. They don't really speak. They're just in the space. They're very overlooked. And I think women can kind of relate to that. So I thought if I make them little tiny billboards, like little moments in a domestic space that say something, that yell maybe from their tiny little, perspective, that it would resonate with what I'm trying to say. That's an interesting question, though. Thank you for that.
Yeah, but it's a good answer. That totally makes sense.
Okay, okay, good. I had some thoughts about Brett's work. Can I just kind of riff for a second?
Please. Yeah.
Okay. There's interesting conversations about landscape in your work. In grad school, another thing I'm interested in is like sustainability and landscapes. And I was interested in the idea of like unframing a landscape, sort of making it less like a consumable image, right? A landscape is framed. We choose what's not included in the landscape when we look at it, even as a person in the environment. And your idea about like memory and place, I think, is really important as you're talking about these spaces in the world. And I think that's really interesting how you're addressing these landscapes. You're sort of decolonizing them or unframing them. You're presenting the feeling of the place, the evocation of what it means to be in that space in time. And there's also conversations that are interesting about memory, because oftentimes we believe that memories are always correct. And I think you touched on that briefly, like, is this really what happened? So when you bring up like memory of a place, memory of a landscape, that can vary so greatly, even if people are standing next to each other, because of our own experiences and what we bring to that space. Anyway, I think that's so interesting. Like, please keep exploring that idea. And Nell's piece, when you are drawing and sewing into the bags, I think that's really interesting. And there was one where you could sort of see the face, but there was like a number underneath the face, almost like a mug shot. I thought that was really great, sort of tying into that forced labor idea. I think that's really interesting. And I really loved your just like very luscious paintings. They're just great to look at.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I loved the bags. I think that's really interesting too. It was almost like unintended, or maybe it was intended, but it felt, sometimes like it could be heavy-handed, but it didn't feel that way at all. It felt like it just like naturally happened.
Thank you. Well, and I was going to say about Sarah's pieces, I mean, I don't know about you all, but anytime I see that, that casserole or, that pony, it's like I'm from the 90s as far as, my background. And so those symbols like really resonate. Everybody has a reaction from, I think about my mom making, food in that specific casserole and recognizing those symbols. So, and those My Little Pony, I mean, every little girl can remember having those. And so I think it's, it creates a very visceral response from that image.
Yeah, thank you. I know it's not everyone's lived experience, but one thing I've sort of learned when you're talking about issues for a very broad group of people, you just have to sort of speak from your own experience. And like, I don't want to talk over anybody or anything like that. But when you do that, you also find a lot of people that do resonate with your experience or can overlap their experiences with yours. And that dishware, like my grandmother, I have some of my grandmothers of those, they're sort of, they become these generational objects, and then the toys just blended themselves to this conversation as well. And I imagine that will continue to change, but yeah, thank you.
What's interesting about that too is like it speaks so much about like a specific American culture and time in our culture.
Yeah.
Because it's like everyone's grandmother had that dish. I actually have that dish. It's our Thanksgiving dish. And so yeah, being a 90s person in America, and maybe not even all parts of America, but like it's like a snippet. And I also wonder how that could apply, in different cultures. What does that look like? What are their two, tokens of home and childhood, right?
Yeah.
Like a tagine and a rag doll. Like, is
Mhm.
it different in different places at times?
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. I've always thought it would be really fun to have either a workshop with different people from different walks of life and cultures and talk about like what are your domestic objects? Like what are the things in your spaces that were overlooked, but also have like they link to your experiences, especially as a woman. And I just think that would be a really interesting conversation to that's something we as artists can do is we can bring attention to things that are overlooked and things that have power but are sort of silenced and make your audience take a moment and think about something differently. So yeah, mine's very niche. I realize that, and that's okay. It just is what it is.
Yeah,
And
there's
I had a
sorry.
question for Breck as well. Do you, the images of those landscapes, do you pull just completely directly from memory and then add on to them? Or some of them almost look like they could be aerial photography or like, like a drone looking over a cliff. I'm thinking of some hikes that I've taken. It looked exactly like that. But do you work from any photography, even if it's a snapshot with your phone that you use as a preliminary, or it's completely from memory?
I'd say it's like 95% from memory.
Yeah.
There was a moment I have, those the first two paintings are of Glenwood, which is Glenwood Canyon. And I recently was like, oh, well, maybe I should do some more there. And it does speak to place and memory where like you can't go home because nothing's the same as the way I remembered it. So when I looked at the pictures, I was like, well, that's not at all what it looked like in my mind from my being 10 years old in the back of my dad's car, right? And there were terrible also, and there were terrible, terrible wildfires that like decimated that whole area. So I couldn't, even if I wanted to like have a good representation, I kind of couldn't get that because it doesn't look like that anymore. But I think the frustration part for me, and maybe this is just like a limitation in skills, is if I have a good frame of reference, like an actual photo, I feel like no matter what my painting looks like, I'll never be happy because it will never be like this photo version.
Right.
And so it's like I don't even like I just throw it away entirely because that's also not the point generally with what I'm trying to
Right.
do. It like muddies the waters. I think if that answers the question a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting. Like Sarah, yours is so like your um the representation so like direct, while Nell and Breck, y'all are kind of working like Nell, you're depicting things that are in the future, while Breck, you're doing things that are in your past. And I actually had a similar question that Nell asked you, Breck. But going back to Nell, I was wondering how you kind of form the figures of what's in the future, like what your inspiration is for kind of what your idea of what the future looks like is.
That's a great question. I think I just get a lot of inspiration from um always carrying that idea of, wanderlust and inside of me, like, travel and experiencing other cultures and other places really inform my work. So, um, I try to, understanding the human condition is something that it's hard to do if you don't get out there in the world and observe. And so I try to make it a point to go places and see things that are, completely out of my comfort zone or that I've just never seen before. And that always, it just helps me to start thinking about there's, other worlds out there, even within our own. Um, So yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. It's hard to answer.
Thank you. Well, I think as it gets close to 1, we'll start wrapping up unless there's any final questions. And, right. So thank you to our 3 artists. I have their websites and social media in the chat as well so that you can follow along and see further progress of their works. I'm also wanting to announce that Sarah is going to be a part of a group exhibition, Mujeres de Aztlán, Persistent and Resilient. And that's going to be in San Antonio, opening March 8th at the Central Cultural Aztlán. So if you're in San Antonio, please check it out. And as far as Women Their Work goes, we do have an opening this Saturday for Elizabeth Chapin's solo show Tree Spell. It's a very immersive installation, and that opens Saturday from 7 to 9. So if you're in Austin, we hope to see you there. And then finally, as a part of Print Austin, Women in Their Work will be hosting a marbling workshop on February 3rd at 2 p.m. in the gallery. These spaces are limited, so tickets are 20 for members and 25 for non-members, and you can sign up on our site. But otherwise, thank you everybody who was able to join us, and thank you again to these 3 wonderful artists for their presentations. This will also be up on YouTube too, if y'all like to revisit it.
Thanks so much for joining us today and your thoughtful presentations.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a good one.